What's happening, everyone? The Conversations with Coaches, episode 11. I will have Nick Irvine, better known as Pinellas Barbell, on Instagram because no one uses their real name on Instagram anymore. But Nick is the co-owner of Pinellas Barbell. He is, I don't want to call him the wrong thing here. From what I know of him, he's kind of like a functional training specialist or corrective exercise specialist. He works in the strength and conditioning field. I know he recently told me he just got a contract with a local university, which I will let him go over as well, which is pretty cool. It really signifies the level that we have grown to in this field. You don't just have people trying to power lift their way through strength programming. You have actual strength coaches who are now teaching powerlifters and working in that aspect. And being that he works with people in person, he works with professional and amateur athletes, powerlifting athletes, and owns a gym and runs that business as well. He is definitely someone you want to learn from and how he's thriving in that aspect from both an athlete perspective, because obviously he has systems and management down, but also from a business aspect, because obviously he has systems and management down. So as soon as Nick hops on here and sends an invite, we'll get him on here. Funny enough, Nick was someone who told me that he would literally like to buy me a microphone for all the in the middle of the workout tutorials I do, so I don't have to shout over the music or do anything that I would be linked up. And he's been threatening to do it for like a year and a half to buy me a microphone. And next thing you know, he just sent me a picture today of a microphone that's literally sitting at Treasure Coast Barbell where I work out. So he came through on his threat because apparently he loves the content so much that he's going to help me with that. So as soon as Nick pops on here, we'll get him to come through and ask about those things at Pinellas Barbell. I did just see him this weekend. His athlete, or not his athlete, but Sean's athlete, his gym co-owner, Sean Danner, athlete, Samantha competed at the meet. I believe she went 9 for 9. She killed her day, something like 1,063 in sleeves. We're just waiting on Nick here. There he is. He just joined. He'll hit the tab that says join, and we'll get him through, and we'll go over all of that. And there's some, like I mentioned in yesterday's post, Shane Haller, Craig Foster, two monster athletes. Both are qualified for pretty much any meet in the world. Shane, there's the view request. Shane was a doesn't even come close to weighing 308. I think he weighs like 290. He just doesn't want to cut to 275, which more power to him. I agree with that. There we go. You've never looked better, bro.
I had to.
The likeliness, though, is uncanny because your neck is a little bit more stable.
It has to be. I'm working on the throw a little bit. I'd say long time no see, but just like you said, I got to see you this last weekend. You're traveling.
That's about the only way I see people is at meets. I've literally shown up and people are like, wow, you really exist.
What's the next place you're going to?
Sorry. I have to go to, or get to go to Idaho in the middle of July for the seminar Iron Legacy. And then the weekend after that, I'll be in Miami again for the Summer Ghost Class repping.
You got your present? Oh, you're not there yet.
Yeah, I just explained to them that you literally bought me a microphone for my content in the middle of the workouts because you're like, I want to hear you better.
I sent something else too, though, so that one's a surprise. It'll be there on Friday, so.
I hope it's cookies.
Even better.
Even better. That is really awesome. I appreciate that. I appreciate Nick tremendously because he is someone who lives in the realm that I started from, working in person with clients I went into fitness management and I was a personal trainer for I don't know how many years before the online audience really grew, and I segued you to that. Nick is someone who still lives in that world, and I was mentioning that you just got a contract with a local university to do strength conditioning for the university. Explain that for us.
It was a pretty organic process. When they first reached out to it, it was a long process, but it just made me really comfortable by the end when we finally got it. But 2 years ago, they reached out to us, and at first I was like, tell me why you're reaching out to us. Why here? Why is this? And, it's just, spreading far and wide that, absolute strength is even more of a foundation, and it's more specific than people really think that it is beneficial. So that's kind of why they reached out to us first. And Division II and under, they don't have a ton of money for, a strength and conditioning coach, let alone an entire department. And the commercial world, I started very similar to Jordan Wong too. I just loved it. I was just more of kind of the socialite in that world. So I tried to work up corporately, traveled around the state doing all of that stuff. But building departments, the training department was kind of my role. It was what systems are in place and what's going to retain the clients the most. So, carrying over that mindset to the college, I was like, well, there's this much money. We have this much information to get across to them, and this much service that needs to be rendered. I'm like, it's tough. We need to figure out how we can get all of these pieces together and have it work, because it's not going to work just for one coach. This is why your service is kind of shoddy. This is why you're looking for somebody else. Just the money isn't there. The people, I think, should,
Right.
It wasn't enough money to live off of, and it's a full-time job. So, figuring out a hybrid approach and then actually using an entire department instead of just me. So we've got, 2 doctors, Dr. Cam and Caleb, and Nico, who's a CSCS, and we've got another CSCS working on it. So an entire department, but we can work on it remotely and work together through a system, and it makes it really cohesive, and it blends and works with all the other departments of the school, whereas it was just a contracted job, and the strength coach that they had was just kind of off hands. So, hopefully with the hybrid system, we'll be a part of the school, but, they're going to get more service and more credibility than they could ever get with just one person. We don't obviously see the kids as much. To me, that was the biggest area to cut costs out of, because that person's time spent driving to that school and physically being in front of those kids is the most expensive. So, we worked that out. They circled back a year later, actually. So I proposed that, and they're like, it sounds like a good idea. Let's just keep looking. Went through 2 other coaches. It just didn't like it, and they circled back, with just one team, the volleyball team. And we worked with them all last year, and they had their best season they had. We could have just been lucky. Could have just happened anywhere. But yeah, all the girls got it down. Absolute strength. It's very deliberate. It's very direct. It's very simple and similar from week to week. I need to measure and manage stress. I need some constants. I need a lot of constants, and they're terrible at lifting. So let's keep this the same, and just lifting consistently and trying to correct everything is going to do enough and carry over enough. And managing the stress throughout the season just made it light years easier. I think most strength coaches try to get too wrapped up in how much more we can add and how much more we can do. And it's just so much accumulated volume that they're just stressed out throughout the entire season, and injuries happen, and we're just trying to keep the wheels from falling off by the end. So if we peak somebody similar to like powerlifting, I can manage the stress so much more. I'm looking at the accumulated tonnage from, their workouts and their practices and games and things like that, to just try to make sure the peak works right. And, worked really well. They were concerned about how heavy they were going mid-season, but I'm like, it's less stressful, trust me.
It's funny you mention that, because most powerlifters who run conjugate are very unaware of its format and its system. They're only aware of how Louis ran conjugate. And that's what spread its popularity. However, if you look at Mel Siff's books, like Facts and Fallacies of Fitness and Super Training and so forth, the way conjugate was designed was all the GPP work was off season. They didn't have to play, so that's when they did all their volume work. And in season, they were maintained with literally just dynamic and maximum effort. So they would do maximum effort, very low volume work, just to maintain as much strength, absolute strength as possible. And the dynamic effort work for the field and course athletes was literally things like very light cleans, very light snatches, or plyometrics or throws. That's all it was, jumps, throws, things that were athletic in nature that dealt with triple extension. It was not all this accessory work, all this volume, because that's how they kept them recovered and ready to play on the field. It was just, what's the minimum we need to do to maintain absolute strength and power, and let's do that. So it wasn't all within a 1 week cycle, it was an entire season cycle. Most people just aren't aware. That's why it's all concurrent.
Yeah,
it wasn't called conjugate.
You can't really see it on the board, but I have the months through for that team on there. And essentially it is just split up like that. It's going to be more, tissue and work capacity, out of season. And then, we're just trying to maintain strength with as little stress as possible. We peaked them for the big, most important games. They beat every ranked team that they played that year. So that was on purpose. I'm like a stats guy. When I get into a team, I won who is it?
Yes.
Most spirited in high school. I just get so excited about like the teams I'm invested in. Right? So I'm just looking up all the stats and all the other teams. I was like, let's build this peak around this team and University of Tampa and things like this. And I think it ended up working well. They beat all the ranked teams. They made it to the tournament. 0 injuries, which is insane. I've never really heard anything like that. You know, there was one mild injury. It took somebody out one game, but they rolled an ankle stepping on a foot. So I couldn't really, that wasn't, you know, because of too much fatigue or anything like that. But
That professional in that realm is to minimize athletic injury so they can play continuously through the season and give their best. It is not how strong can you make them, it's how
and maybe you could give me some insight on this. I've got like one theory, but we peaked them for the tournament. It was perfect timing. They got a deload before, a week off, and then man, they played their butts off throughout the tournament. But then they decided to test their maxes, and everybody excelled in their maxes when the season was over. So to not only sustain the strength, sustain the weight on your body, they actually were stronger by the end of the season. So I wasn't expecting that. I wanted to sustain the strength, but you know, maybe I peaked them too late. I tapered some of the intensity a little because I was worried that it might be a little too much going into that last week. So maybe I peaked them a little late and they could have handled it, but.
It's a great reminder, though, because they are still playing their sport, and it's a great reminder to athletes that they don't need to lift maximally to maintain maximum strength. They just need maximum velocity to maintain maximum strength, because you are probably, if you're tapering down, you're giving them like the 80%, 85% range, and you're moving it at full force, they're still training that velocity aspect, absolute power aspect that carries over. It's one of the reasons why I tell people, you know, train hard, but then peak easy, because if you're doing all this volume and peak and you're not able to move the weights fast, you're taxing yourself too much, and that's not the point. You've already done the building. You've got to pull back and then let
I'm
it
a
come up on the
huge
platform.
advocate for, you know, and plus it's like, it's D2, so, you know, these kids are still developing more, I want to say, than maybe the extremely gifted kids, you know, and the professionals. So I think just keeping it very specific and box everything. The gym actually doesn't really have any sports-specific stuff in it. It makes no sense for me to try to have them do that in their gym. Makes no sense.
There's a question that came down below. Do you encourage them to do their max during the season?
I don't need to. So no. No, I'm not going to, you know, leave that max effort for on the court, and we're just kind of maintaining everything. We'll do it after. We do it 2 to 3 times a year. We test verticals, we test broad jumps, and then we test the maxes on some of the lifts.
Well, if you're testing max verticals and broad jumps, those are truly cool maximum effort things. They're just not maximum effort that are loaded with the bar.
So we could still do those things. You know, I'm so open to it being flexible, and the nice thing about keeping it simple is it's very flexible. It's very easy to add more stuff on and change it. As the kids develop, maybe just having them lift very generically and specifically might not be enough, but we have so much room to play with from there. They all still need to develop. I don't think they realize in college how technically sound a squat really can be before we decide to move on to other stuff. And the sport-specific drills, in my opinion, are they really that sport-specific? To me, really specific is if you have to put your cleats on for it. If you don't have to put your cleats on for it, if you don't need a glove or a bat, or,
you know,
do your sport more. Do it a lot. Be in that game scenario. Keep going. I've freed you up the time. And the amount of time they also give me in the gym with those kids, that's another reason why I had to pick these workouts like this. They only get a marginal percentage of their time doing athletic stuff to be in the gym. How much of an impact am I going to be making with all of those things?
Did controversy with the NHL Combine kids, and the one kid who got like the record pull-ups was like 14 pull-ups, and ESPN had posted and they were all proud of him, and then there was all this pushback from like CrossFitters, strength athletes, powerlifters, like he only got 14 pull-ups. This kid's gonna sign like a $20 million first-year starting contract right out of high school, and they were shit canning him because he wasn't better at pull-ups. It's like, dude, he chose to be better at hockey, which is going to pay him like $80 million over the rest of his life. Pull-ups aren't paying him $80 million. Like, he understood priorities here. It's like, he was the best kid at the combine, and everyone was like, I could do more than 14 pull-ups. Like, good for you. Are you making $80 million?
If they told me to never do a single pull-up again in my life and gave me $1 million for it.
Right.
You know.
Yeah. So doing the big rocks is what's important, especially when you're dealing with developmental athletes. So proprioceptive awareness, athletic skill, balance, coordination, those things matter so much more. I know Phil DeRue, who's a good friend of mine, he does that very similarly with his MMA athletes. It's more volume off season, it's more specific work where it's just dynamic and maximal strength work in season for them when he's consulting for athletes. But he does a lot of reactive work, coordination work, skill work, because their transitions are so incredible at the speed they're moving at in their sport. He's like, that is a big rock for them. He's like, if I get them to a 500-pound deadlift, that's great, but it's not a big rock for them. If I can get them to come up, down, change levels, transition, shoot in faster, that's a big rock for them.
And again, going back to just the flexibility, I think all of the athletes should start with the basics. I want to start the same with all of these athletes. And we have room to develop and change. I mean, just like we do with the powerlifting athletes. To start with something general, fill out a part Q. All right, this is the general idea. Let's bucket you into this group. And then your program becomes just uniquely your own after a couple of years. And it's not for anybody else at that point, So we're looking to transition the programs and really develop them. They're going to build a whole new facility for us too. So a strength and conditioning facility in there. So
nice.
That'll be fun. That's probably when we're going to more start introducing, different planes of motion and things like that. Something great. I don't know much about this. This would be a fun topic. The buttons and stuff, the lights and do you know what I'm talking about? Yes. What?
Yeah, the reactive.
I can see that having an impact, almost like similar to like peaking, but like peaking for your brain. Like, do you know much about that stuff?
Yeah, so I've seen it used, and I know Phil has used it. So what it is it's a way of testing readiness. So it's not developing reactiveness. It's a way of testing an athlete's readiness. So the same way they would use like heart rate reserve, heart rate variable monitors and stuff like that. And, if your heart rate variable might read low, but that doesn't mean anything. You can still put the same power output just because your heart rate variable is low. But if your reactiveness is slow and decline, that usually signifies some level of systemic fatigue, not just, peripheral fatigue. So like your legs might be tired, but if your systemic fatigue doesn't test high, then you could still go. But if your reactiveness slows down, your body's slowing down, then the brain synapses to those muscles, that's systemic fatigue, and that's delaying your reactivity. So they can use that as a measure, like what's your standard baseline? And if you're not measuring that baseline, okay, we need to taper back today. But if your baseline is great, we can go up.
I like that.
Things like that.
But that, again, also doesn't seem like it has to be something that people do all the time, right?
You simplified it. I saw the video. You guys had the grip dynamometer. That's a hard one to say, but grip dynamometer. And that's like the basis of how physically ready you are is testing your grip strength. If your grip strength, your body is fatigued.
Yeah, what else was I going to say? I also think different levels of athletes, for talking more like not strength sports, right? Different levels of athletes probably require different, they're not going to be doing as much strength training. They're kind of already there. And
I know that's like blasphemy in our world.
Well, there's a couple of high level, Dr. Cam works at Nicole Gabriel's place. She works with professional baseball players and some collegiate and high school athletes too. Super sport-specific drills for baseball players. And I'm like rolling my eyes. Right. Like, oh my God. I started to think about it more, had conversations with him, and the higher level, the pros, I see it way more important to do stuff like that. Number one, you've got not just only that guy making $1 million, you got, millions of dollars riding on, the agent and everybody else connected to that guy. We need them to, they just don't like to lift really heavy, just kind of keep them conditioned. And almost, to me, it seems like it would be more of like just make sure you're still healthy. It's almost like what a doctor would do after you're done with physical therapy to test your level of readiness. It's kind of like constantly doing something like that with them.
I look at it like so reverse engineering. So like when the sport shifted away from gear to raw, and we quickly realized that a lot of the things that were applied to gear weren't going to work for raw because we're missing that range of motion under load. For example, like doing very heavy loaded chain or very heavy loaded band tension completely negated the bottom of a raw squat. You can get away with that if you were in powerlifting gear. So with an athlete, you're looking at a field and sport athlete, not necessarily a powerlifter. You're looking at that range of, okay, they mostly play above parallel, not below parallel. So maybe I just need them to have that velocity above parallel so I can do a lot of heavy band tension or I can do a lot of chain tension, those movements, because I don't necessarily need to load the bottom. Maybe in the off season we strengthen the bottom, but in season I'm keeping them at the field or the level or height they're playing at, and that's where you apply those concepts. That's what keeps them healthy, because you're negating the risk a little bit by not putting them in precarious positions where they don't need to be.
Other than football, baseball players are a little more particular. I don't know if you ever like work with them, but they're very sensitive to overhead stuff and any type of pain or tweak, or anything like that. So I know there's going to be some sports that are going to be more difficult to kind of get through to about lifting heavy and lifting more frequently, but.
It doesn't necessarily need to be specific either for that athlete. I remember many years ago, Stephen Bowser owned CrossFit Fort Lauderdale and the playground East and West, and they brought in the Nova Southeastern University baseball team, the high school. For 2 years, they were contracted out, and they were killing it doing CrossFit. They weren't doing anything specific to baseball. They were doing mild-level CrossFit workworkouts 3 days a week, and these kids crushed it for 2 years. And then they're like, I don't know if I want to risk my kid doing Olympic lifts and blah, blah, blah. So they got pulled away. But they won a championship that year, literally just doing CrossFit. They just needed to get more conditioned and stronger on very basic prime movements. They were doing swings, box jumps, pull-ups, burpees, and like variations of the weight lifts, nothing significant.
And we have, a lot of smaller kids too. So, trying to put a little meat on some of their bones. It's obviously tough to get across to some of the girls. Obviously the whole bulky thing, I don't even like, it's just so over talked about. I don't even want to bring it up, but,
the verbiage is stronger.
Yeah.
That's what the verbiage is just going to get stronger.
Recruit more motor units and recruit them faster. It's like, it has nothing to do with size really.
Yes.
But.
All right. Transition into how does someone who focuses on sport-specific work and corrective exercise become part owner in a powerlifting and strength-specific gym?
You answer that. So,
did you it to just be your training space in general? And
so
it
started with Sean and I. We met at a commercial gym that I was working at, and he was in town from college. We actually grew up half a mile away from each other, didn't even know it, in the same town. And he was in town, and he had some Olympic weightlifting shoes on. And the first thing I said to Sean was, "Nice shoes, dude. Like, what are those?" We're talking, I don't know, 12, 15 years ago. I don't know how long it's been. No, especially not in a commercial space. I didn't even know at that time there was anything outside of a commercial gym, So we just got to chatting, and one of the first times we worked out, we hung out. He had stuff in the shed of his parents' house. We worked out there, and one day we got all you can eat prime rib and potatoes at like a dive bar on the beach. And we just had a shot of whiskey, and then we went to a parking lot, and he had a deadlift bar and some plates in his truck, and we just started deadlifting in a parking lot. Yeah, so
you guys started that,
and I guess that's how that started. So if anyone wants the origin story to follow, just don't follow this one. But we grew to be good friends. We ended up being roommates. I lived in Daytona for a while. I moved for work, worked in Orlando, Tampa, Daytona. When I finally moved back from Daytona, we lived in a house together. We lived together for almost 7 years, and we never fought. Like, never once was there like a big blow up or anything. it was really cool. And I'd get home from work, and we would just have this massive piece of paper on the table, and we would just write out plans. It was just field of dreams to have our own facility. We, over a couple years, we collected a bunch of equipment. We're like, oh, this is neat. Put it in the garage and put this in the shed. And
this started as a dream concept mapped out on paper. Let's just buy a bunch of equipment and then just dream to like what our ideal.
And then it was just about every night. It was just a fun idea to explore, and we just naturally did it. It wasn't really a job to us or anything. And eventually, it started to wear off because we thought of everything. Like there was no more really dreaming.
Right.
And it was more or less at the place to where it was ready to go if we wanted to. And he went and looked at a space one day and then called me and said, hey, I just put a down payment on a space. And it was all fun and games until then, and I was freaked out after that. Oh God, like I have to quit my job and start doing this and figure it out. But I found the place I was supposed to be, the gym. We always get asked that question growing up. What are you going to be when you grow up? What are you going to get your degree in? Couldn't stand it.
Yeah.
Hated it. Had no idea. I went to school for hospitality because I thought I was going to work in retirement communities my whole life. So
oh, wow.
I love the retirement communities, but it's just kind of what it felt like was falling in place, and I have to pick something now. I'm in college. Got to work, got certified as a coach, and started working at a gym. And just from day one, I was like, this is totally kind of where I'm supposed to be. Like, I just love it. Being on the workout floor is, and also my parents drilled in a level of paranoia of, always going to school or work. Like, you have to be busy. Your palms are going to get hairy
right.
if you don't. Kind of thing. So, I always had this drive from day one to just always like be at work or be on, I feel like I was trying to bred to maybe be like a bricklayer, just constantly like moving and active. I couldn't sit at a desk. So I just loved being at the gym the whole time. I worked with, general health and wellness, and Sean was the powerlifting guy. Just a wizard
right.
with the numbers and math and the projections and stuff. And, that's where I started to really learn it. And the idea was I'm just going to have my client base, and anyone that really wanted to get more serious about strength sports, they transitioned to Sean's programming. And, he still programs like the pro powerlifters, that we have. But, I started to more and more, learn from Sean and learn from the resources Sean had, and started doing it myself. And, turned out I ended up loving it. And it's just such a broad foundation to start with, for health and wellness. So it turned into even more of a big part for I just got done coaching a 76-year-old person who's got done benching,
Wow.
So
Sean,
what's that?
Like insurance, correct? Sean
Yeah, the strongest people in our
correct?
gym all work in insurance. So.
I've heard that he gets them all jobs with the insurance company so they can be like full-time powerlifters with like low-level responsibility but make a living so they can help take care of them. Walt told me that, but he works in insurance, so he measures like a lot of probabilities and liabilities, and he somehow applies that to the program. What's the probability projection you just mentioned, and what's the best way to minimize those liabilities to make sure that they're healthy, showing up on the platform and peaking, which is super fascinating because that is such an interesting concept of taking the concepts of insurance premiums, packaging, pricing, and putting it to the powerlifter to make sure they show up their best and they have longevity in the sport. Because that's my passion project, to make sure everyone can do this 10, 15, 20 years and not flame out in 5. And Sean has a way of doing that. I know he uses a lot of like work capacity stuff with compensatory acceleration training rather than maximal loads. Like I know Shane Holler's a gym. He squatted, shit, what the hell did he squat? 1,900? What did he squat at 3 over?
926.
926, weighing like 290, 295, below 308 weight class. And when he squatted 926, I think the heaviest lift he took in all of like training was like 800 or 815.
And I did that with Sam. I do that a lot with my athletes too. Huge base of volume, and the off-season stuff they affectionately call puke fests. Timed rest periods and lots of sets. 10 sets of 3, things like that. A little bit of sled work if they can handle it. I'm sorry.
Which throws back to what we talked about at the beginning, which is skill training. I was very heavily influenced by Fred Hatfield's approach, which was the inverted volume approach with submaximal weights progressing over time. And then he would throw overloads in because he was a single ply lifter. So he would do submax progressive weights raw, and then pre-meet would throw in 2 to 3 overloads. And that was how he built his total, his 1,048 squat. Sean and you utilize that same approach of high volume inverted work on the big movement, like the squat, the bench, or the deadlift, because that's all skill training, precision training, and then the load comes because you've been training the force, velocity, and the movement. You don't have to think it's automatic.
To exhibit strength, you don't need that many exposures, right? So we decide we want to peak them for that day and only that day. Especially these people that, if you squat 80% and it's 800 pounds, there's a lot of systemic stress there we got to recover from. So, we really want to restrict that. And I think the only downfall some people might say is that, well, you don't really get an accurate projection if we don't see, some maximal weight moves pretty close to the meet. But you also don't see them get too fatigued, and you know exactly that they're going to be as fresh as possible on meet day. And if we programmed them this way, we can assume the yield every time for that individual. So, the numbers we hit with Sam were just so spot on. She might have had a few more pounds there, but no, she didn't touch anything over, she squatted four, yeah. We didn't touch anything over 365, maybe 375. Just get a round estimate of maybe where the opener is. I didn't know if it was us. I didn't think this was factored in, but she jumped almost everyone in that flight. She started in the middle of the pack with her opener and ended up, second to last in the flight by the end. I don't normally see a lot of people do that, and if they do, they're just overshooting and
That or they've opened up way too heavy, which is common. People open heavy, like, I'm going to set the tone for the day. It's like, no, you're going to fatigue yourself for the rest of the day. Your opener doesn't matter.
But I feel like I was freed up a little bit with that just because she was wide open to touch this heavy stuff and make these jumps because we peaked her for that day. We didn't really. The only overload I really have her do is just a heavy static hold with like 115% or something like that.
Right. Get comfortable with the load on your back.
It's shut down, it's deload, and then, off to meet day, and she's just super fresh at that point. So I changed it up a little bit for newer people, but still just a similar idea. The breakdown of days a week is very similar to conjugate. It's Monday, Tuesday, Thursday, Friday, dynamic and kind of a max effort. There's a lot of different approaches to doing it.
Wait, so what would you describe as max effort if she's not touching full max loads? Are they like max 5s or are they they're not max singles?
No, not even close. So yeah, we're doing 5s and 3s. Sometimes I throw top sets in and then just a few back downs too. My dynamic effort is not often, bands and chains and things like that. I start throwing like boards and bands in closer, like just into the peak really. But the dynamic effort for me is just, it's more of a skill acquisition day, like variation. Try to just get this variation of the main skill down, I'm not looking super crazy at like, I almost throw in RPE. I almost make it kind of like, how much do you have left in the tank for these days? And we work on mechanics kind of instead of, bands and chains and accommodating resistance and things like that for most of them. I try to keep it very, very specific. I don't even use that many specialty bars, maybe an SSB or Buffalo or something like that. But again, the newer people, intermediates and stuff, I don't think you realize how much of just doing that thing you really can tolerate and do.
I do that a lot with my own programming for myself. Because of the wear and tear and the years of experience I have, I use a rate limiter of hardly ever trained belted. Yeah. Unless it's like the last week before deload, I almost never train belted for my squats or my deadlifts, because that's going to give me more proprioceptive awareness. I have to be more reliant on skill and position and awareness than not relying on the pressure of the belt to maintain and control the weight. And then when I throw the belt on, it feels like a cheat code, It's like, where'd this strength come from? Because I limit myself from being able to lift very, very heavy to keep myself safe and protected, but also to drive in that neurological pattern over and over and over again. The belt is used to enhance, not used to push thresholds and maxes, because it's very easy to overdo it. Even with an RPE, it can be very easy for someone to overdo it because, well, that didn't feel hard, let me add more. It's like, that's not the intention of this block or yet. So I agree with that. I use a rate limiter a lot, and I train a lot of force expressions. One of the reasons why I do use, like on variation days, not my main days, my variation days, I'll often use like some chain assistance for squats as my overload position, or band work to just be fast out of the hole. Warm-ups. I'll do warm-ups banded. Just
so I guess I'd be prudent in saying it's like a dynamic effort day. But just for the sake of, we are following some, approaches given to us by Conjugate. It's split more or less the same way. But I think band work, again, it doesn't take that much to exhibit strength, and I don't think it takes that much to exhibit speed really under these loads too. So, a block with them, take them off, you'll see the difference. I don't think we need to train long periods of time with things like that.
No. The adaptation phase, and that's one of the reasons why Louis actually used like 3-week waves, because that's about the time. 2 to 3 weeks is when you adapt to it, then you're not getting anything from it anymore. Keeping it is only, keeping it ruins your pattern a little bit, because they create some artificial stability, and they create a stress reflex that isn't normally there on its own unless you train that through things like compensatory acceleration, speed reversals and stuff like that. And I know Craig Foster, one of the top athletes in your gym, he squatted 1,011 in sleeves, 1,008, somewhere around there.
I think he was 1,026.
Was that his wraps or was that his sleeves? I know he actually it might be his sleeves. He did squat more in sleeves.
He can't stand them.
If you've ever watched Craig squat, he is a full-on dive bomb squatter, which doesn't work for a lot of people unless you have significant body mass, which Craig has plenty of. Sorry, Craig, I still love you, but you have plenty of body mass. But Craig will drop and drive like no other. If you've never seen anyone drop this fast with 1,000 pounds and stabilize and stand back up, but that's the reflex he's training, is that stretch shortening cycle, but he's doing it with 1,000 pounds. And that's the intention of a lot of band work, is to train that stretch shortening cycle by overloading the eccentric. But they're stabilized for you. And Craig is able to do this without the stability, which is what's the key. Because if you want to be a dive bomb squatter, you can only come back up with what you can stabilize. If you can't stabilize it, it kills you. So using the bands long ruins your proprioceptive stability.
I got a photo of him on the TV right now, actually. Watching us. The Paul King. The Paul King. Henny King. He likes that one, too. I don't know. In some sense, he's such a true athlete. He just likes doing. He really. So we have to focus way less on cueing Craig, and more so just applying the things that force him, to do it correctly. We're trying to work some of the dive bomb stuff out. Eventually, we still want him to get stronger. We got to descend maybe a little bit slower. It's going to be tougher to start to. It's going to wear on him. So, tempo work, and he does. They train just so simply, man. They really do. They'll probably put some bands on the bar sometimes. They'll use bench blocks, floor presses with chains. I think I saw Shane doing it, but that's as crazy as they kind of get. Some FFB in the off season, maybe change their foot stance wider or narrower.
That was something Charles Poliquin talked about a lot in his age when he was dealing with a lot of powerlifters. He would consult with some powerlifters, and he would just do very moderate stance changes for their squat work or their deadlift work because that was a stimulus to them. Like he still wanted them to do the basics. So he might have them squat with their feet 2 inches more narrow than they normally would, or have them deadlift with their feet 2 inches wider than they normally would, even for conventional. Just changing stances hit a little bit of a nuance on the movement that hit slightly different muscles for them, but allowed them to get that overload stimulus because it was different.
Yeah.
But it was the same, but different. And so he would try aspects in short phases, like 2-week blocks. It wasn't something like we're going to do an entire 6-week block of close stance squats. It was, we're going to do 2 weeks close stance, 2 weeks at your comp stance, 2 weeks wide stance, and then come back to it.
I love looking at it, especially with my beginners, you know, even just throwing tempo and a pause and some back downs for them. They won't get the first set right. You know, for me to be skilled in it, you're going to have a variation thrown at you and then get it down really quick. You know, that to me, like, lets me know how much better an athlete's getting if I can throw some sort of new variation or skill acquisition to them and see how fast they can get it down, you know. So I be more broad, I want to say, I guess it would be, you know, being able to adapt and just move your feet out and really get it down technically, you know, quickly.
That is what people have asked about, where all this information that I provide or come from. And it's like, I've learned so many different ways to move the bar. Having competed in 3 different strength sports, be it strongman, powerlifting, weightlifting, I've learned so many different ways to move the bar. And the more ways I've learned to move the bar, the more efficient I've gotten at all of them. And the more proficient I've got at my 3 power.
You know, it's more scaled in, like, specifically, but if we look at the development of children athletes, have them do as many sports and movements as possible, and then we kind of peek it into one specific sport, and man, they're really good rounded athletes at that point, you know. So doing it with a barbell, you know, to me is very similar.
There's an entire book on that called Range. I believe it's David Epstein, and he talks about that, about the specific sports skilled children end up doing worse than the broad sports skilled children over time, who then take to that specialty because they've developed such a different base of training methods and movement skills that they can apply to the one skill, versus people who, like, if you're that parent who puts your kid in spring baseball like every year, summer baseball and travel baseball, and all they ever do is baseball, by the time they get to the high school level, they've peaked. They don't get any further than that because you've broken them down. But if your kid plays like football one part of the season, baseball, wrestling, track, whatever, those are the kids that end up finding the single skill in high school, but then excel at the collegiate level because they've played so many different sports. Like a Tiger Woods philosophy is the outlier. He's the exception, not the rule. Like the kid grew up as a golf prodigy from like 3 years on. That's rare. Whereas if your kid plays everything, then they become the next Tiger Woods kind of thing because they've developed everywhere.
Dude, awesome. What, you got any other questions? You want to talk about my Bob Ross collection? I do.
Do you have a Bob Ross collection?
You didn't know?
I can't confirm or deny that I have Bob Ross underwear.
So it just kind of became a thing. I've got, you know, this Christmas ornament and stockings. I've got some flip books and mints and more bobbleheads, T-shirts, action figures. There's an energy drink. Did you know about this?
Yeah, I have seen it at FYI, the entertainment store, the Bob Ross energy drink. I have seen it. I haven't tried it yet because it's not sugar-free, but I've seen it.
Bob Ross hats.
So is it true that there's no such thing as mistakes?
Yeah, and beat the devil out of it, you know? This one's my prized possession. This is a full vintage, time period accurate Bob Ross.
This is wonderful. I don't know what to get you for Christmas. Bob Ross memorabilia.
Sorry. My real favorite is the toaster. Right. Bob Ross toast.
That's basically Jesus. So I grew up watching Bob Ross, and I know his entire story and history. He was trained by Bob Alexander, and then people started asking Bob Ross to teach them the techniques, and so he split up on his own, and Bob Alexander like literally shunned him from the community. And people liked the way Bob Ross taught better than Bob Alexander. I'm sorry, I'm a finance guy, so I read things. The Bob Ross Foundation that his family still owns takes in $20 million a year on memorabilia, products, licensing still. He never made more than $1 million a year alive.
I heard, I don't know if it's changed, but the people that started like the company, you know, Bob Ross apparently was just the painter guy. He loved painting. And this couple, they turned it into a enterprise, a massive enterprise. And then they took the rights to his name over. So actually, nobody in his family gets a penny from any of the stuff that's sold to Bob Ross.
They bought his licensing technically from him before his passing, and so that is correct. His family doesn't get any of it because he legally sold it to them while he was alive. Yes,
I heard it was like on his deathbed,
that is correct,
too, or something. Or maybe his like uncle sold the rights. Or his son apparently was an amazing painter too. So
yes, there's something about Bob Ross. It's the voice. He's so calming. He can do no wrong. All right, I do have one question for you since you went off on the Bob Ross thing here, right? Because I ask everybody this. A book that has influenced you in any capacity that you would recommend to anybody else.
Man. I was number one first going to say, like, you have, like, spouted off, like, 6 or 7 books today, and I was like, how much do you read?
My house has 100 pairs of shoes, over 200 books, way too many hats, beanies, and things like that. I'm a cool shopper. So Amazon will tell me that this book became available, and it's got one click. And so it sits in my house until eventually I pick it up.
I don't know. It hit home for me. One book that just instantly came to mind, I wish I had more like carryover stuff, was like Rich Dad, Poor Dad. You know, was a good one. It has really no relevance here to the strength sports stuff.
It does. It does if you know how to correlate. So if you're not familiar with Rich Dad, Poor Dad, Robert Kiyosaki, first of all, he's batshit crazy. That's fine.
I gotta look into it.
Yes. He's a full-on conspiracy theorist, and he thinks the government's trying to steal all your money, and we're gonna all go broke, and everyone's
that's a turn from the book.
He's fucking nuts.
But
yeah. So he is this is still the #1 selling business book of all time, and it is great because he explains the difference between assets and liabilities. Things that you own that cost you money versus things that you own that make you money. Now, when you're dealing with programming aspects, you're dealing with athletes, you also have to have them understand what their assets are and what their liabilities are, whether it being the liability might be their lifestyle, the people in their circle, their friends, you know, their gym habits, whatever. It always comes down to, is what you're doing an asset or is what you're doing a liability? And so there are great lessons in that book that people know how to correlate the financial lesson to the life lesson. That's a
couple other books that came to mind. What kind of got me into the corrective stuff was when Kelly Starrett first came out. Like, to me, it was like you know, you had CrossFit came out, 2008, and he was just kind of right behind that. He was like the first kind of medical professional really to kind of make things palatable and look at recovery and correcting things and prolong, you know, the longevity of doing stuff like that. So his book, Supple Leopard, you know, to me was just like a fascinating read. You know, it was broken down really well where, you know, they looked at all the movements and then any breakdown of the movements and then specific things around those breakdowns, you know, to work on or that influence it and why. It was fun. It really got me on a tangent and moving forward, looking at even more stuff like that. I loved, now you got me talking about books.
This is a good thing. This is how you educate every other coach and athlete.
I remember going to like one of the first travel meets like a long time ago. I was sitting in the airport and Juggernaut, Chad Wesley Smith just came out with a couple books. And I was like, all right, fuck it. Let me buy these. This would be a good reason. Read them on the flights and I loved it. It was very like concise information. And I thought it was general enough to apply to any type of powerlifting or strength training methods that you wanted. It really coined a lot of the terms that were still kind of novel at the time that, you know, everybody probably knows now. But, you know, it really got me looking at more of the stuff you were talking about Sean does with the projections and predictability of everything, you know, having specific terms that describe the stresses we're putting on these athletes to adapt to, you know, really made it a lot easier to maintain the health but also like, predict outcomes. So.
He also was one that kind of pontificated that you probably shouldn't exceed about 9.5% for your last heavy lifts before a meet to save energy for the meet, because the idea is to express strength, not test strength until meet day. And functional, movements, like you're preparing to do the squat, bench, and deadlift, so the majority of your peak should pretty much just be squat, bench, and deadlift, a couple supplemental lifts to maintain, and that's
you'll be able to correct me on this but my exposure to him was really just kind of through like YouTube. He was just tracking his own journey and then talking about kind of the new or different ways that he's programming. And then he was walking through teaching people how to do it, but also doing it himself, and then ended up getting a world record, through
world record, American record. He got an American record squat, 933 in reps, I believe, as a unlimited.
It was
super
like
heavyweight at the
USAPL,
time, the American
right? I think he did. No, USPA.
No. He competed on tested. So 933 was the American record squat that he hit. At the time, I remember this, he was very big on utilizing Bondarchuk's method. Bondarchuk wrote the book Transfer of Training, which was hammer throwers training with heavier hammers. They get stronger at throwing a hammer. So if they were throwing a 12-pound hammer, they were training with a 16-pound hammer. So when they went to the 12, it felt easier. So his thing was not necessarily the overload aspect, but the specificity of skill training. He's like, if you want to get better at squatting, you squat more. If you want to get better at bench more, you bench. So he produced more frequency-based programs, which were very similar to Shaco style, not as extreme. You weren't benching 4 days a week, but he was starting to pontificate away from the bands and the chains and more into the specificity of the sport to get better.
He was definitely an early influence for me to, for lack of a better term, give me a lens to see training through to approach it with. So he influenced that a lot. I haven't really looked into any of his stuff now, but
now he's more business savvy with the app and the program. We all evolve eventually, so he's a little bit more business savvy than he is coach savvy at this point. He owns the systems rather than teaches them.
We were through COVID trying to update the website and everything like that. I found the website developer that he used for the Juggernaut website, and I reached out.
Right.
And we had some funding through COVID and things like that. A bunch of money I wanted to spend back in the business. And I was like, hey, reach out to you about developing a website. Would you be able to do it for this price? If not, would you know we're talking thousands of dollars. If not, would you, be able to recommend somebody that could? And he said, for that price, no, I'm not even going to recommend anybody. So that just made me think, okay, he's just is working at this level here.
High level. Yeah, very high level. There's like 8,000 people on their app paying like $30 a month for it. So it's pretty significant income at that point for him. It's astronomical.
And he did BJJ and did quite well. And was he like doing like that coaching for like an American BJJ team or something like that?
He had different athletes that went through his school and his system, and he came out with he initially had done a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. He was at one point strength coaching combat athletes many years ago, and then got involved in combat sports. So he came out with another book geared towards it, and another program specifically for it, but not necessarily like coaching a specific team. Just utilizing his connections within that field to spread his word out there.
He obviously has some good connections, obviously, too.
People doing BJJ than there are powerlifters. So if he can get 8,000 powerlifters on his app, he's probably like, I can probably get 20,000 Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu athletes on my app. That's pretty awesome. How do people find you, connect to you, learn from you?
Mainly through the Instagram, through the website. Locally, word of mouth. I think small businesses, with all this internet and everything, we kind of forget that, touching base, being in front of people and actually connecting with them in person, still works extremely well. You just kind of got to get out there and do that. But, through the website, we've got, a number on there. I try to put as much information, especially through COVID, because I wanted more flexible services and the gym was closed, to really give out as much information as we could, and then get in touch with us as much as possible. So the website kind of has all of that stuff on there. You can get directed to it through our social media and everything like that.
And
we
you have a YouTube channel as well,
it's
yes?
tough, times a year we get pretty busy. I wish I could spend more time on the video, and we talked about so you're the tech savvy guy in the gym. And it was partly because it was just they were passion projects. Again, like I can't sit still and not work. But it was something different to still be focused on work, but a little refreshing from just being on the floor and, working with a ton of individuals all the time. So I just loved it. And just for me, like the big thing was like capturing that moment that I was in, just to savor it as a memory later. We're not going to do this forever. We're not going to be with these same people forever. So to just kind of remember the moments and stuff, the way that I had them, is a lot of fun. So I wish I had a little more time. It's a passion. We have that podcast too. Maybe we could have you on there one of these days and chat with everybody. So
I would love it.
Yeah, it's a lot of fun. I remember sitting up to like 3, 4 a.m. just plugging away, like podcast, let's do it. So
It's not love it. It's not work anymore. It's just fun. Like you said, you've monetized your passion, and that's the wonderful thing to see. One of the reasons why I wanted to have you on here is so people realize you can do that. It's just not the way you necessarily think it's going to be.
I mean, we're pretty straight through up until we went to the new location with the idea that Sean and I originally started with, day one, 8 years ago, living in, call it the Manchester house, plugging away, just putting the idea together. But yeah, it always pivots, and you need to keep everything fresh, so working on these little passion projects that still work, that still adds to the business. And t-shirt design, like I just got into like designing, logos and that last meet shirt I did, I think I have one over here, just sitting down and trying to think of something to do for the athletes that, is also like a passionate thing. I don't know, you can't really see it, but
people wearing it.
Yeah, just the design stuff, I love it. The audio, like the video stuff, and I don't know, I could probably get a job just trying out personal training softwares too, because I've probably used 8 or 9 of them. Just downloaded them, plugged in a couple programs. Actually, that was the biggest thing that probably taught me about programming, was using all of these different systems and rewriting the programs just all the time. Like I learned the most from Sean. He gave me, I don't know, 30 programs, and I was going to input them into the system as templates to be able to like modify and start to use. And I would literally rewrite them like word for word, set by set, video by video, everything, just plugging in and just seeing it constantly for hours. I really learned really well how Sean programs. I put him into one system, and then apply a couple of those programs to a couple of people, see how they work, and then I put them in a different system. I'm rewriting them, constantly looking at them. So I learned the most, I think, from Sean more that way than listening to him and seeing it work through with, people like Shane and Craig and Matt. So.
Yeah. Awesome. Oh, Matt Cuthbert's there too. I'm sorry, Matt. I'm so sorry. I forgot to put you in. He actually did awesome this Saturday.
Another
So
700-pound squatter in here, man. It's really cool. And I'd love to see him.
He's probably
he should be tested on the tested side. He's he did great, but he's also I didn't realize he got up to like 360 pounds. He got big. Sorry, Matt.
Yeah, we got to work on more 60-second rest intervals for you, sir. Well, Nick, appreciate your time. It was really awesome to sit down and talk with you and interview you and learn so much from you and how you do things and how you systemize things. It's phenomenal to see somebody with a local gym branch out to start doing strength conditioning at a collegiate level and get that level of respect. I think that's the highest honor when an actual university is like, hey, we like what you're doing so much, we want to bring you on. That's the ultimate acclamation. Instead of bringing in an entire staff, they're like, we're going to farm this out to this guy because he's so much better than we are. That's
they
huge.
Don't realize I'm the janitor here.
you do wear many hats when you own a facility, including janitorial. So I will confirm that too. When I used to own a gym, that was the least favorite part of cleaning somebody else's pee.
You know,
but
a toilet Craig just sat on, and somebody's asking me, you know, about percentage work. I was like, you realize you're asking the janitor.
Yeah. I will upload this to YouTube, and I'll send you the link so you can share it as well. And I hope everyone actually does take the time to look at your website and contact you and realize what a phenomenal job you and Sean have done at Pinellas Barbell. And I'm going to be up in Tampa a couple times, so hopefully I'll stop by there too and hang out with you guys when I am up in Tampa. I would love that, and train. Probably like middle of the week shit, but nonetheless, I will come up there and deadlift with you all or squat with you all and have a great time.
Please do.
Thank you, sir. I appreciate you.
Man, this was awesome. Let's do it again. Yep.
Absolutely. Have a great one.